Hello folks, tonight we're drifting back to 19th century New Zealand, a place where the sheep to human ratio is frankly outrageous, where dense ferns brush your knees and the air smells like salt, soil, and someone making very questionable tea indoors. You've arrived by boat naturally because there's no other way unless you fancy riding a whale. The planks creak beneath your boots, the dock sighs under every step, and everything feels like it's been built with a shrug. This is a colony still figuring itself out. Somewhere between dream and logistical nightmare, it's all mud, sheep, damp wool and mail that disappears into the wilderness like it's gone on a walkabout. And yes, tonight's tale involves actual parrots. Flapping, shrieking, slightly judgmental parrots being lightly coaxed into delivering the mail. You probably won't survive this from sheer absurdity alone. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fun to see how far this sleepy nonsense travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the boat into a drizzle that's less like rain and more like the sky whispering passive-aggressively on your face. The shoreline is barely a town, just a few wooden structures pretending to be buildings, a post office that's almost definitely a repurposed animal shed, and one sheep that's eyeing you with open disdain. It's sometime around the 1870s. And you've joined the hardy lot of European settlers trying to make a New Zealand, while the original Maori inhabitants politely wonder how many more of you plan to show up wearing tweed in the jungle. The colony is growing fast, but communication? That's another story. Mail from Auckland to the Otago region might take weeks if it arrives at all. The official overland postal routes exist only in theory when it rains, which it does constantly. Flooded rivers eat carts, hills chew through hooves. A coastal delivery was once delayed because the mailman got into a scuffle with a confused seal. And here's your mainstream fact of the night. By 1872, the government had established post offices of the fourth class in especially remote areas, meaning some mail was officially trusted to part-time grocers, innkeepers, and one guy who just really liked stamps. It's not that they didn't try. Horses were used, of course, but they'd break legs in the mountains or bolt at the sight of key parrots. Rowboats were a thing too until someone realized humans can't row uphill. Eventually, some poor soul mumbled, "Well, the birds seem to know where they're going." The birds. Oh, the birds. New Zealand is full of them, many flightless, some devious, most noisy. And among the noisiest are the parrots, the kea and kaka to be precise. The kea, in particular, is a creature of high alpine intelligence and low moral standards. They chew through boot leather, unzip tents, steal shiny objects, and once, famously, dismantled a parked car piece by piece, while the owner was on a hike. You encounter them quickly, green flashes in the canopy, sharp, beady eyes peeking through mist, and the occasional screech that sounds like a drunk accordion trying to file a complaint. The Maori had long studied and named these birds kaka, kakapo, kea, and respected their place in the ecosystem. European settlers? They immediately assumed the parrots could be trained for tricks. This was a cultural trait among Victorians. If it moves, teach it to deliver a message or play the piano. It starts small. A local school teacher ties a note to a kaka's leg and lets it fly from her cottage to the neighboring town. The parrot returns 3 days later with someone else's laundry list and what may or may not be a toffee wrapper. Still, a return trip is better than most postmen manage that month. The idea spreads. Amateur bird enthusiasts, of which there are too many in any self-respecting frontier, start quietly testing what they call avian post. They leave food rewards at each end of the route, and some parrots do seem to get the hang of it. Others treat the messages like confetti and just enjoy the snacks. You're invited to watch one of these early experiments. A settler straps a rolled-up message to a key's scaly leg, using what looks like someone's leftover shoelace. There's a dramatic pause, then the parrot squawks, flaps twice, and zooms off over the treetops. Everyone cheers. You squint. "Where's it going?" you ask. "We're not quite sure," someone admits. This is what passes for innovation here. Newspapers start to catch wind of the story. One publishes a short piece titled "Feathered Messengers of the Southern Alps," describing the birds as a marvel of nature, second only to the reliability of Wellington wind. Another editor claims a parrot delivered a love note across 30 miles of rugged terrain. Historians still argue whether this was factual or just thinly veiled satire. Because here's the thing, by the 1870s, colonial newspapers loved quirky frontier tales. Nothing sold better than sheep in hats, dogs that could do maths, or parrots carrying the Queen's correspondence. Even if the stories were exaggerated or entirely made up, they gave the colonies an identity, one equal parts practical and ridiculous. So now, you're living in a place where your neighbor genuinely believes his bird can replace a telegram, where postmasters are divided between skeptics and feather-forward thinkers, and where every time a parrot lands on your windowsill, you're not sure whether to offer a biscuit or a reply envelope. At the local tavern, a few regulars have even started a betting pool on which parrot can make the fastest delivery. The leading contender, an especially large key named Neville, once flew from Dunedin to Oamaru in under 4 hours, pausing only to harass a group of Sunday hikers and steal half a sandwich. You raise your mug in toast. "To Neville," someone says solemnly, "our first airborne public servant." Morning drifts in over the hills with a thick, misty stubbornness, dampening every inch of the settlement and muting what little color the place manages to hold. The ground is soggy, the roots are glistening, the birds are loud, of course they are. A kea cuts through the sky in a low, showy arc, drops something unceremoniously on the blacksmith's roof, then steals a strip of jerky from the drying line and vanishes without a thank you. No one reacts. Just another delivery of sorts. Postal challenges remain unchanged, miles of flooded terrain, washed-out paths, wagons stuck in axle-deep mud. Official mail routes operate like a magic trick gone wrong. Plenty of setup, no payoff. Horses quit, rowboats sink, letters vanish. The colonial post, already understaffed and overstretched, seems held together by stubborn optimism and twine. One might call it an opportunity, others might call it an ongoing embarrassment with envelopes. And so parrots. In a converted shed behind the bakery, still half-scented with yeast and birdseed, a small, increasingly confident group has begun its experiments. The Feather Post Society was not founded so much as it simply appeared, emerging from long afternoons of boredom and bread crusts. A retired clerk leads the charge, a man named Edwin Maynard with spectacles too large and faith in birds far larger still. His notes are extensive, handwritten, and only occasionally smudged with jam. Inside the coop, 3 parrots blink with the solemnity of philosophers. One of them, Turnip, is the rising star. 7 completed flights, 3 partially successful returns, 1 collision with a church bell. Maynard calls it promising. He keeps meticulous notes, written in a kind of handwriting that gets smaller the more excited he becomes. A sample entry reads, "Turnip returned with twine, not message. Twine may be symbolic." The townsfolk remain divided. Some view the whole enterprise as quaint. Others, particularly those with roofs now decorated in scrap paper and bird droppings, are less amused. The blacksmith, whose chimney has become a favored perch, has started threatening lawsuits. The town's priest received a message last week that simply read, "Tell Janet I'm sorry," and has not stopped speculating since. Yet word is spreading. Local newspapers, never ones to resist a novelty, have latched on to the tale with gusto. Headlines boast of the Key Courier Program and Letters by Beak. Satirical cartoons show parrots in uniforms, one wearing pince-nez and carrying a bag marked urgent. A particularly theatrical article describes a parrot interception scandal that allegedly resulted in a duel behind the Methodist Church. Historians still argue whether any part of that event happened, or if it was simply the editorial staff entertaining itself on deadline. There was no official government approval, just bemused tolerance. Still, an inspector from the Post and Telegraph Department was sent to observe. His final report included measured praise, a long list of concerns, and a sketch of a parrot attempting to eat his hat. The conclusion read, "Ingenuity observed, but operational viability remains elusive." The birds, of course, are entirely unaware. Some fly their assigned routes with apparent diligence. Others abandon the mission halfway through, distracted by picnics, laundry lines, or shiny buttons. One particularly ambitious Kea has developed a fondness for the bakery and now insists on delivering itself daily to the back door, loudly demanding scones. Among the more successful tests, a parakeet trained to fly between a farmhouse and the general store, roughly 2 miles, delivering grocery lists in exchange for raisins. The route held steady for 13 days before the bird defected to the butcher, where the treats proved significantly more appealing. There have been worse career moves. Maynard claims these stories represent early growing pains. Others call it performance art with feathers. But the experiments continue. Even local officials begin to entertain the idea. In one meeting, someone suggests setting up bird posts between neighboring hamlets. No one writes it down. But later that week, a tiny wooden birdhouse appears outside the town hall. No one uses it. It looks quite nice. From time to time, the birds do seem to get it right. A message meant for a teacher arrives at her door, slightly nibbled but legible. Another, addressed to whoever finds this, contains a short poem about mud and regret, and is tacked to the tavern wall for a week before being turned into a drinking song. No one is entirely sure whether to treat it as mail or mythology. The records are patchy, the birds are unpredictable, the success rate depends heavily on the definition of success. Still, something about it sticks. Not the logistics, those are shaky at best, but the gesture, the possibility. A parrot lifting into the sky, carrying words from one human to another, feathered punctuation in a sentence, stretched across miles of difficult land. At dusk, the settlement slows. Lamps flicker to life in windows. Smoke coils upward in lazy spirals. Somewhere near the chapel, another parrot lands heavily on the slate roof and squawks as if announcing the end of Act 1. No one looks up. Tomorrow, someone will retrieve a scrap of paper from the gutter. It will read, milk, thread, ask Mary about the trousers. And it will smell faintly of honey and feathers. It will not be the intended message or the intended recipient, but it will be delivered. The key has returned, not the same one, probably, or possibly yes. They all seem to share a certain attitude, as if they know something the humans do not, most likely because they do. This one lands with deliberate heaviness on the water barrel outside the general store, cocks its head, then drops what looks like half a note and an entire button before flapping off toward the ridgeline. The storekeeper retrieves both, sighs, and places them on the shelf, labeled incoming, unclaimed. Above the town, the hills roll gently into peaks, patched with low shrubs and frequent echoes. It is quiet up there until it is not. The forest edge rustles with birds that do not believe in privacy. Parrots dominate the airspace. Kaka, Kea, the occasional cheeky kakariki, all sharp-eyed, sharper-beaked, and thoroughly uninterested in human schedules. They watch everything: mailmen, bakers, horses, newcomers. Some observe with idle curiosity, Others steal handkerchiefs and then judge the reaction. In the town below, the mood is tentative. The Feather Post Society has split into two informal factions. One insists that parrots can be trained, given time, patience, and an ever-expanding menu of snack incentives. The other quietly believes the birds are training them instead. Both groups remain civil, united in their shared disdain for the official postmaster, who has thus far refused to issue recognition of the program, citing lack of envelopes, protocols, and plausible logic. Still, the trials grow more elaborate. Routes are mapped between homesteads and outposts. Small perches are constructed in trees and on fence posts. Coloured tags are tested: blue for personal, red for urgent, yellow for livestock-related issues. The results are mixed. One parrot delivers a red-tagged note about a broken axle. Another eats the tag entirely and spends the afternoon shrieking outside the blacksmith's window. It takes 3 days to coax it down. A notice appears in the town square, printed on official paper but with smudged ink. Notice: please refrain from attaching messages to parrots not involved in the postal trials. Not all birds wish to participate. The weather complicates matters. Spring arrives with enthusiasm, and with it, more birds. Nests appear in odd places, inside chimneys, under carts, once beneath the mayor's hat during an outdoor speech. Eggs are guarded fiercely. Messages tied to brooding birds tend not to travel far. The town learns this quickly and adjusts. Deliveries resume after hatching season. The mayor continues to wear his hat, though now checks it first. Newspapers continue their coverage. One publishes a column under the title Postmasters of the Sky. It includes an interview with Edwin Maynard, who describes the initiative as a noble confluence of necessity and winged possibility. The article concludes with the observation that no Kea has yet to request a pension. The footnote simply reads, "Give it time." Not everyone is impressed. A local farmer pens a rebuttal letter titled "Feathers Do Not Equal Function," citing incidents of misdelivery, accidental crop sabotage, and one parrot that reportedly flew off with a minister's sermon notes. The congregation was treated instead to an improvised lecture on patience, followed by 40 minutes of awkward hymns. The minister has not forgiven the bird. Some residents begin customizing their mail. Messages are written on fabric strips rather than paper. Others experiment with scented markers, believing the birds may respond to lavender or bread crust. One man attempts to train a parrot using poetry. The bird memorizes the first stanza, then flies off mid-recital and returns with someone's handkerchief. Children begin naming the regular parrots. One is called Councillor Feathers, another Margaret. The bakery names its favorite Kea Crumbler and starts offering it end pieces in exchange for outgoing notes. Crumbler accepts the arrangement and later returns with a bakery receipt from 2 towns over. It is the closest thing to a confirmed delivery all month. Tiny wooden signs start appearing. Circles for letters. Triangles for parcels. X's for "Do not drop anything here ever again." Someone adds a lightning bolt. Its meaning is unclear, but it becomes popular. The birds ignore them all. At the schoolhouse, the children stage a play titled "The Parrot Who Saved the Post." It features elaborate costumes, one song, and a cardboard mountain. The story is loosely based on a true delivery, loosely in the way porridge is loosely food. The finale ends with the parrot character declaring, "No roads, no problem." The crowd applauds. Someone tosses a muffin. Government interest returns briefly when a regional commissioner visits to assess the rumours. He watches a scheduled demonstration wherein a parrot is meant to carry a letter from the general store to the telegraph station. The bird flies directly to the bakery instead. The commissioner writes a confused but complimentary memo, concluding that postal innovation appears to be in flight, if not yet arriving. Historians still argue whether the parrot post was ever taken seriously beyond these scattered towns. Some claim it was a novelty that never left the mountains. Others believe regional use continued quietly for years, especially in isolated homesteads. The truth is difficult to verify. Records are scarce. Bird-related documents were rarely archived with care. Many were pecked apart before filing. And yet, there are moments that linger. A farmer swears that a Kea brought him news of his sister's illness, and he arrived in time. A woman in the next valley claims a parrot once landed on her windowsill carrying a wedding invitation. She did not know the people involved. She went anyway. Someone found a note in the rafters of an abandoned barn. Faded ink, tied in thread, never delivered. It simply read, "I forgive you." No name, no date. Stories accumulate. Some plausible, some impossible. All carried on the backs of birds that never signed up for any of this. At sunset, the valley softens. The hills catch gold along their edges. Trees lean into the breeze. Another bird glides overhead, silhouetted against the shifting sky. It carries something small in its claws, paper perhaps, or a leaf, or nothing at all. No one watches, but if they did, they would not be surprised. Not anymore. There is a silence in the council chambers, the kind of silence that hovers awkwardly after someone has said something both unexpected and technically correct. A junior clerk, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, has just asked whether the colony ought to formally consider avian message transport as part of the emergency communication infrastructure. No one responds. One member coughs into his sleeve. Another writes something down, possibly the word resign. It is not the first time the government has noticed the birds. The initial reports were treated with the indulgent tone reserved for stories involving eccentric settlers and the curious behaviors of livestock. One dispatch titled "Parrot as Postman" was read aloud in Parliament, followed by light chuckling and one audible sigh. But now, with rural delivery lines faltering and telegrams occasionally arriving 2 days behind themselves, even the more skeptical officials begin to ask questions. Quietly, hypothetically, preferably not in front of anyone from Wellington. Back in the hills, the birds remain indifferent. The Kea continue their daily chaos. The kaka grow louder with the change in season. The settlers adapt. Messages become more poetic, often because brevity is necessary. Too many words and the birds simply remove them. Ink is swapped for charcoal. A woman outside Nelson swears that lavender oil rubbed into the parchment increases return rates. A rival insists it only attracts bees. The town of Featherstone, whether coincidentally named or simply leaning into the theme, holds a community vote. The outcome is unclear, but a carved wooden post appears in the center of the square, topped with a painted likeness of a Kea wearing a postmaster's cap. It becomes a perch. The cap is stolen within the week. Children compose bird songs. Not songs about birds, songs for birds. The goal is unclear, but rehearsals are held every Thursday in the schoolyard. A small choir performs one outside the bakery and is promptly gifted scones by the baker and an entire wheel of cheese by a confused Kea. No one knows where the cheese came from. Deliveries become interpretive. A letter intended for a farmer arrives at the home of a traveling tanner who opens it, assumes it is a riddle, and solves it incorrectly. A stitched scrap of cloth is found hanging from a weather vane, embroidered with the words, "Too late, try again." It is not clear whether this was the message or the commentary. Still, patterns emerge. Certain birds seem to prefer particular routes. One bright-feathered Kea appears to have developed a fondness for letters containing apologies. Another only carries messages if they are rolled very tightly and tied with green twine. Attempts to bribe the birds with biscuits continue, with limited success and frequent theft. Some residents create message bundles, small packets containing a note, a button, and occasionally a crumb or a petal. The thinking is that emotional weight might help the bird decide. It does not. One parrot returns 3 times in a row, each time with the same unopened bundle and an increasingly suspicious expression. The local paper begins running a regular column titled Flight Observations, penned anonymously. It chronicles recent deliveries, partial successes, and especially creative failures. Highlights include a love letter dropped into the town cistern, a list of hardware requests returned with all vowels removed, a message that simply read, "Yes," delivered to 3 unrelated recipients. One entry includes a hand-drawn diagram of a possible parrot postal network, complete with nodes, wingspans, and estimated biscuit consumption. It is technically accurate. It is also shaped like a pineapple. No explanation is offered. Historians still argue whether the government ever issued official instructions regarding the feather post. Some documents suggest exploratory committees, others dismiss the notion entirely. One archived report refers to indigenous aerial logistics in such vague language that it may have been about clouds. Meanwhile, the birds keep flying. A settler north of the ranges strings tiny flags between fence posts, each bearing a symbol for a letter of the alphabet. His theory: semaphore for parrots. The flags are shredded within a week and replaced by the birds with leaves, twigs, and what appears to be a piece of someone's glove. The settler declares it progress. He begins documenting the patterns. His neighbors stop visiting. Elsewhere, a woman discovers a cluster of notes wedged into the rafters of her barn, decades old, some barely legible. They include requests for sugar, a sermon about patience, and one unsigned message that says, "Bring the spoon." She frames it. Not all experiments succeed. One enthusiastic couple attempts to breed a line of postal parrots by rewarding birds that make deliveries with dried fruit and affectionate letters. The offspring are fat, indifferent, and prone to singing. No messages are carried. One becomes a pub mascot. Still, the idea persists. Not because it works exactly, but because it might. That is the crucial detail. The success rate is not the point. The point is that someone tried and occasionally, accidentally, it succeeded. There is a night, deep into summer, when the sky is full of stars and the air holds just enough chill to remind the bones that time is passing. A parrot lands on a gatepost, ruffles its feathers, and drops a folded message onto the step. No one hears it fall. Inside the house, a lamp burns low. A man opens the door to fetch wood and notices the note. It contains one sentence. "It will be all right." No name, no signature, no explanation. He keeps it anyway. Later that week, the town receives a delivery of fence nails and flour via traditional cart, delayed by 2 days due to a collapsed footbridge and a cow with authority issues. The experience reignites debate over the reliability of wheels versus wings. A carpenter argues that at least the cart eventually arrived. A baker responds that while the cart delivered flour, a key had already delivered 3 recipes and a shopping list with marginalia. The argument is paused when a bird steals someone's spectacles. The postmaster continues to ignore the matter. His office remains quiet, though a note is seen pinned discreetly on the inside wall. If birds arrive, offer no eye contact. Wait for departure. No one admits to writing it. Further south, another town attempts to formalize bird-based delivery. They construct what they call a flight hub, a structure resembling a dovecote, outfitted with perches, miniature postboxes, and a rotating message drum. It is carefully positioned on a hilltop for maximum visibility and minimum practicality. Within days, the birds begin using it as a dance platform and occasional nesting site. A committee is formed to study these behaviors. They call it a promising first phase. One Kea brings back a hair ribbon, no one knows from where. A child wears it anyway. A traveling photographer captures a rare image of a kaka in mid-flight, holding a small message pouch between its claws. The image is blurred, slightly off-center, and utterly captivating. It is sold as a postcard titled "Swift and Silent, Colonial Sky Mail." This leads to a modest boom in parrot-themed stationery. None of it is functional. All of it is enthusiastically purchased. Further entries appear in the anonymous newspaper column. One describes an incident in which a parrot delivered a note sealed with beeswax and stamped with what appeared to be a thimble. The note read only, "Too windy, try next week." Another entry recounts a parrot that hovered over a wedding procession and dropped flower petals, followed by a receipt from a general store 3 towns away. The newlyweds took it as a blessing. The receipt is later framed. Someone attempts to create a coded system using song fragments. The hypothesis: birds might recognize musical motifs. Small bells are attached to windowsills. Notes are assigned to emotions. The results are inconclusive. One parrot begins whistling a variation of Greensleeves, but only when it rains. Meanwhile, the historians remain skeptical. One lecturer at Otago dismisses the entire period as avian myth-making. A rebuttal published by an amateur ethnographer argues that the intersection of birds and message-bearing traditions is more widespread than previously acknowledged. Footnotes include carrier pigeons, raven messengers, and anecdotal accounts of chickens who delivered keys. It is not peer-reviewed. It is extremely popular. At the edge of the valley, near an old trail once used by gold prospectors, there stands a single wooden post. No sign hangs from it now, just a small perch. Locals say a bird used to stop there every 3rd morning. No one remembers what it carried, only that it came. The mountains loom, weather-shifting and secretive. Winds tug at the treetops. Somewhere high among the rocks, a bird perches on a ledge, holding a ribbon in its beak and looking down at the scattered trails below. It waits, or perhaps rests, or perhaps in its own time considers the next destination. Not every system must make sense. Not every story ends neatly. Sometimes the most remarkable thing is that someone believed it might work at all, even once. A final note is found tucked into a fence rail, aged, weather-worn, and tied with string hardened by years of frost and sun. It is opened carefully, unfolded with reverence, read aloud once beneath a sky smeared in twilight. "Tell her I remembered." No name, no date, no certainty of arrival. But it was written, and it was carried, and it was found. From a distance, the valley does not look like a place where messages fly. It is a sprawl of irregular rooftops, paddocks, bush-covered ridgelines, and creeks that choose their own direction regardless of maps. The roads bend reluctantly, the fences lean, and the wind arrives without warning. It is not a place designed for efficiency. It is a place where things meander: weather, people, and the occasional bird with a parcel tied to its leg. The enthusiasm for feathered correspondence does not wane. It simply shifts. What began as a lark has matured into something resembling ritual. Not formal, exactly, not reliable either, but present. Constant in its inconsistency. Enough households now keep a bird shelf, usually just a flat board beneath a window, sometimes with a small cup of seed, sometimes a folded scrap of cloth for softness. A few are decorated with carved initials. Most are weather-stained, used, and trusted. No official schedule exists. That would imply order. What exists is memory. Some birds arrive at sunrise, others prefer twilight. Certain kea are known to avoid Tuesdays. One has developed a habit of landing only after church bells. Another refuses to deliver if the wind exceeds a certain force, determined presumably by the angle of a clothesline 3 farms away. Edwin Maynard, now older and increasingly eccentric, maintains his position as archivist of the airborne post. His notes have outgrown their boxes. Visitors to his home are greeted by shelves filled with bundled messages, organized by direction, weight, and the mood in which they were received. He insists tone influences success. Cheerful notes arrive faster, apologies take longer. Requests for help seem to vanish and then reappear exactly when they are needed. He no longer questions this. Maynard also maintains what he calls the Avian Delivery Logbook of Partial Certainty. It records every known or suspected bird-borne transmission. The entries range from the practical. Sophie's tea order arrived in wet but legible condition, to the improbable, small blue note landed in cooking pot, identified as cousin's recipe, now lost again. The logbook includes footnotes such as note returned unopened, possibly rejected. Delivery confirmed by coincidence. Message eaten, recipient deduced contents correctly. It is less a record of history than a map of belief. Elsewhere, people experiment. One woman near the coast trains a pair of birds to travel between her home and the lighthouse. The system functions for 4 weeks before the birds begin exchanging their own notes, contents unknown. She reports a marked increase in mood and lets them be. A young boy creates a game with a friend across the valley. Each day they send each other a single word carried by a parrot named Button. The game lasts months. Sometimes the words form sentences, sometimes they do not. One day, Button delivers no word at all, just a feather tied to a string. The boys declare this a victory. A brief revival of interest reaches the capital. A regional journal publishes an editorial titled Winged Whimsy, Lessons from the Feather Frontier. It praises the community's persistence, lightly mocks the concept, and concludes with a quiet observation that perhaps faith in the improbable is a kind of infrastructure too. The article wins no awards but is clipped and pinned on 3 separate notice boards in the valley. Historians still argue whether the feather post represents innovation, improvisation, or indulgence. Some compare it to the Polynesian tradition of long-distance communication by pattern recognition, birds, waves, stars. Others dismiss it as colonial eccentricity layered over indigenous silence. Neither group agrees. Both are likely half correct. The birds do not comment. By now, generations of parrots have grown up with the smell of ink and the occasional sugar cube. Their children fly alongside roads that once belonged to oxen. They land on windowsills that once bore candles and now carry tins of biscuits. Some of them still carry messages. Some carry twigs. Some just arrive, wait, and leave again. The bakery paints a mural on its outer wall, a key holding a note in its beak, hovering above a loaf of bread. Beneath it, the words, "Delivers daily, no guarantees." People smile at it in passing. A new teacher in town introduces the birds as a subject of study. The children are encouraged to observe behaviors, note patterns, and write essays. One writes, "I think they listen more than we think." Or maybe they think more than we listen. The teacher pins it to the wall beside the alphabet chart. In the evenings, light slips softly through kitchen windows. Candles flicker, doors creak open to let in the breeze. Parrot lands quietly on a fence post. Someone notices, someone else does not. It drops a message. It takes nothing. The note reads, "I meant it, still do." It will be tucked into a drawer. Read again months later. Saved. Not for proof, not for records. Only because it arrived. Some homes begin marking the time of their last delivery on small chalkboards beside the door. Not for accuracy, very little about the system deserves that word, but for amusement, or perhaps a kind of quiet faith. A Wednesday, 3 weeks ago, scribbled in tidy cursive. Yesterday-ish appears in bold, smudged script. One board simply says, "Still waiting." A visitor asks for whom. The homeowner only shrugs. Rural homesteads far from the main tracks have grown more invested. Lacking regular postal access and without telegraph lines, they have embraced the winged alternative with a mixture of sincerity and fatalism. Their bird stations are elaborate, miniature pavilions with overhangs for rain, feeding trays, and spaces for messages protected inside glass jars. Some are decorated with local stones or inscribed with mottos such as "Carry well" and "Nothing urgent, just important." Of course, not every household participates. Some reject the entire endeavor, declaring it folly. One man files a formal complaint after a parrot delivers a message addressed to "My dearest," intended for another woman entirely. It is unclear whether the message went astray or the relationship did. Either way, the parrot was unrepentant. Seasonal shifts bring new challenges. In autumn, gusts grow fiercer, and several notes are found scattered across fields, tangled in hedges or caught on fence wire. One is recovered inside a cow paddock, trampled but intact. It reads, "Take the back road, bridge out." The warning arrives 2 days too late, but is still appreciated. In winter, some birds vanish entirely, perhaps migrating elsewhere or waiting out the cold in quieter hollows. In their absence, old messages are reread. People revisit notes tucked into books or pinned near doorways. The delivery may have been accidental. The content remains. A young girl, curious about how the birds choose their routes, begins placing markers throughout the village: bright ribbons, shiny objects, bits of mirror. She records which items the birds seem to respond to. Her data is imprecise but fascinating. She publishes her findings in the school newsletter beneath the title, "How to Say Hello to a Key Without Speaking." A local weaver begins embedding scraps of bird-delivered paper into her textiles. Some contain writing, others only creases and stains. The finished cloths are displayed at a seasonal market. A passerby recognizes a phrase from a long-lost note and quietly buys the entire piece without asking the price. The church bell, once used only for service and warnings, begins to take on an unspoken secondary purpose. On certain mornings it rings once, briefly, not tied to any formal occasion. The villagers say nothing, but the birds come. A councilman proposes a Bird Appreciation Day. The event is sparsely attended, somewhat disorganized and interrupted by a goat. Nevertheless, a small wooden plaque is unveiled near the bakery, honoring those who carry what we cannot. It is misspelled. No one corrects it. That evening, someone places a message beneath the plaque. "Thank you." No reply expected. It disappears before morning. Somewhere high in the mountains beyond the reach of any road, a fire burns beside a hut, older than most nearby trees. A kettle boils. A man stirs soup. A key lands on a woodpile, clutching a slip of cloth, and waits. The man holds out a hand. The bird drops the message into his palm. He reads it once, nods, and places it beside the kettle to dry. No words are spoken. Sometimes it is not about what is delivered. Sometimes it is about knowing someone tried. The parrot does not linger. By the end of the season, Edwin Maynard's logbooks total 17 volumes. The last page of the newest one contains only a single entry. No date, no time, no location. Just 5 careful words. Carried, found, read, remembered. Enough. He closes the book and begins the next one. It begins, as many things do, with a spectacular failure. A bird, an unusually large key with a bent feather and the expression of someone who has seen too much, was entrusted with a message deemed urgent. The note, wrapped in waxed linen and tied with care, was meant for the magistrate 3 ridges east. A matter of property, or perhaps of potatoes. The sender insisted on its importance. The bird flew directly into the side of the schoolhouse, paused on the roof for 2 hours, and then vanished toward the bakery. The note was recovered 4 days later inside a flour sack, unread, and gently coated in breadcrumbs. This is how the Society for Avian Dispatch Integrity was born. Composed of 6 members, 7 if one counts the parrot who regularly interrupts meetings. The society meets weekly in the old school's side room. Its mission is simple: to understand why, when, and how messages do or do not arrive. The minutes are taken in pencil, then recopied onto small paper slips, which are ceremonially tossed into the air. Some are recovered, most are not. Their working theory, as outlined by Edwin Maynard in the first recorded session, is that the birds operate on what he calls an emotional postal logic, meaning they go where they feel like going, but with meaning. Another member suggests the birds are responding to intention, not geography. A third suggests they simply dislike authority. Outside the meeting room, the townspeople continue with their quiet arrangements. The parrot shelf outside the cobbler's shop has been upgraded with a small brass railing. The general store now stocks parchment in narrow strips pre-cut for bird suitability. The bakery offers scone crumbs by the scoop. Not every delivery is successful. Not every sender is honest. A small scandal erupts when it is discovered that a teenager has been sending anonymous messages through the birds to express admiration for the grocer's eldest daughter. This might have remained innocent had he not begun signing them "The Ghost of Future Groceries." The girl responds with a single note, not interested in mystery diets. The scandal is short-lived. The birds, bored of the drama, stop participating. Meanwhile, across the valley, an old woman begins receiving messages she never requested. Short sentences, fragments of recipes. One simply reads, "Always add the salt last." They arrive sporadically, tied to feathers, or tucked beneath pebbles. She keeps them all in a teacup near the window. She begins writing her own replies and leaving them in an empty drawer. No one has seen the drawer move. The notes keep disappearing. A farmer experiments with small wooden capsules, carefully carved cylinders, sealed with cork and beeswax. He tests them for durability and weight, comparing bird reaction to various shapes. The birds are unimpressed. One chews through the cork, another drops the capsule from a great height, a third uses it to wedge open a shed door. Only one bird returns the capsule to the sender. Inside is a tiny red flower, pressed flat and perfectly centered. Historians still argue whether these incidents mark a shift in the feather mail experiment from practical trial to cultural practice. By this point, most formal attempts at organized delivery have faded. There are no schedules, no rosters. The town no longer expects reliability. What remains is ritual. Messages are still written, still sent, still received sometimes. The parrot post has become something softer than infrastructure, less system, more instinct. An ongoing, unpredictable conversation between people and possibility. One man begins collecting returned messages, not the successful ones, but the ones never meant to arrive. He files them in drawers by tone: sorrow, humor, apology, longing. His favorite is a message that reads, "If you still think of me, smile when it rains." It was found inside a boot. Elsewhere, a child sends a picture drawn in charcoal and string. It depicts a parrot standing atop a mountain holding a map. There are no labels on the map, only a series of arrows pointing outward. The child explains that it is a guide for the birds. When asked where the arrows go, she answers, "Where they are most needed." The drawing is tied to a parrot's leg and released. It is never seen again. Weeks pass. One morning, a package arrives, not carried, but left. A small wrapped bundle, folded in cloth and resting gently on the shelf outside the postmaster's door. Inside, an old message, a drawing, and a pressed flower. No return address. Just a slip of paper, handwritten and simple. "We are still listening." Later that month, the town's blacksmith reports finding a note in the toe of an old boot left outside his forge. It was not his boot, nor his note. The message reads, "The fire is yours now." He pins it to the wall behind his workbench. When asked about it, he only shrugs and says, "The forge has burned hotter since." Others begin to collect these unexplained deliveries, not just the messages, but the contexts, the places they were found, the moments in which they arrived. A carpenter keeps a note that blew through her window during a storm and landed beside an unfinished chair. It read, "Sturdy is enough." She carved the phrase into the chair's underside before delivering it. One boy, too young to write confidently, draws instead. His bird mail consists of small charcoal sketches, mostly animals, stars, and once a key wearing boots. His family humors him, letting the birds carry off the drawings. Several are found days later on fence posts in different parts of the valley weighted with pebbles. One hangs from a tree branch, twisting gently in the wind. None are returned. A visiting botanist becomes fascinated with the phenomenon. She sets up a small study cataloguing the types of material used in the messages: paper, cloth, bark, leaves. She notes the average carry distance for different species. Her data is inconsistent, her conclusions vague, but she presents her findings under the title "Patterns in Winged Exchange, Non-Linear Communication in Colonial Ecosystems." She is invited to speak at a university. She accepts, but later sends word that she will not be attending. The message arrives tied to a piece of lichen. Some of the older residents begin leaving messages not for friends or neighbors, but for memory itself. A folded scrap tied to a railing, a name written on the back of an old calendar page. The phrase "You were right" scribbled in chalk beneath a windowsill. Whether the birds carry these or not seems to matter less and less. By now, no one calls it a system. There is no timetable, no success rate, no delivery guarantee. What remains is a tradition wrapped in feathered silence, not sacred exactly, but respected. The Society for Avian Dispatch Integrity, having held over 24 meetings, shifts its focus slightly. It now documents bird behavior more broadly, changes in flight paths, odd landing preferences, signs of nesting in unexpected places. One member becomes convinced that a particular parrot is mapping human emotion based on porch architecture. The theory is not well received. Still, the data is dutifully recorded. Maynard continues his archive. Volume 18 is titled "Deliveries with Uncertain Destinations." He begins cross-referencing notes with diary entries, weather logs, and local harvest cycles. He develops a theory that messages tend to arrive during moments of unspoken tension. He never publishes the idea. Instead, he folds it into a note of his own and tucks it beneath the lid of a tea tin. The tin disappears a week later. Among the children, feather mail is now a game. They write riddles, dares, kind things. One note, carried by a small green parrot with an injured wing, says only, "I hope you find your way." It is found tucked into the frame of a broken window beside an empty chair. Near the creek, a woman sits beneath a willow and ties a message to a low branch. She does not look to see if it is taken. She just sits, breathes, waits. The branch is empty by evening. Birdsong changes slightly as spring returns. More high calls, fewer squawks, or perhaps people have just begun listening differently. At the edges of the fields, in the corners of quiet kitchens, in the narrow spaces between sleep and waking, the air hums with possibilities. Something might arrive, or might not. No one waits quite the way they used to. But the window is still left open. The shelf still dusted. The bowl still refilled. And from time to time, in a breeze that smells faintly of pine and bread and memory, a shadow moves overhead, and a message, old, folded, worn, is found resting exactly where it needs to be. By now, even the skeptics have stopped rolling their eyes. They have not changed their minds exactly, but they have adjusted their posture. A furrowed brow has softened. A scoff has been replaced with a short nod. The town's view of the feather post has entered a quiet middle space, not quite belief, not quite disbelief, but something comfortably in between. It no longer needs to be explained, it simply is. At the edge of town, a small outbuilding once used for firewood has been repurposed. The door has been painted blue. A bench sits outside, worn but welcoming. Inside, the walls are covered in pinned notes, faded, smudged, water-streaked. Some have been written on carefully cut paper. Others are scribbled on cloth, bark, old receipts. Above the door, someone has carved a sign. Not all messages wait for an answer. People come and go, some leave things, some take nothing. A few add feathers. The birds still arrive. Not predictably, not on demand, but often enough that it no longer feels unusual. They perch on fence posts, rooftops, windowsills, then depart with a rustle of wings and an absence that feels deliberate. Some carry messages. Others do not. Some simply arrive, stay for a moment, and leave, no clearer than a change in the wind. One afternoon, a boy finds a message inside a hollow tree. The ink is faded but legible. It reads, "I remember the soup. Thank you." He shows it to no one. He simply puts it in his pocket and walks home, slower than usual. Elsewhere, a man repairing a roof finds a message tucked under a tile. It says, "Do not worry, you will know when it is time." The roof is repaired the next day. The tile is left loose, just enough for another note, should one ever return. In the town centre, someone begins collecting the oddest of the messages, those whose meaning eludes even speculation. Notes that read, "3 eggs but never 4, or "Tell the ladder it was forgiven," or "Ask the window what it saw." They are compiled into a small volume, bound in soft leather, and placed on the shelf in the bakery, between recipe books. It becomes a local curiosity. Visitors ask if they can read it. The answer is always yes. A cup of tea is offered at no charge. Historians still argue whether the parrot post ever held strategic significance. Some point to wartime animal use, pigeons, dogs, horses, and suggest the settlers were simply extending a familiar idea to an unfamiliar region. Others insist the entire episode was symbolic, a community's way of making peace with distance, slowness, and the impossibility of perfect communication. The truth, likely, is both. One letter preserved in an old journal dated but unsigned reads, "Even if it never arrives, the writing helps. That is enough." By late summer, something like tradition has set in. A small annual event is held. Not a festival. There are no fireworks, no speeches, no formalities. But each year, as the hills begin to yellow and the sky flattens into September stillness, people leave a note somewhere just out of reach, on a fence, in a tree, beneath a stone. Some attach them to birds if a bird appears. Some tie them to wind chimes. Some do nothing at all except stand on a porch with a folded paper in hand and wait until they no longer feel the need to send it. A woman leaves a message in her garden. It reads, "He would have laughed. I wish you could have heard it." A man writes one and places it in a tin box beneath his stairs. "I forgive you, even though I never got to say it." A child, barely able to form letters, draws a heart with wings and tapes it to a windowsill. It disappears before lunch. And always, somewhere nearby, a bird watches. Sometimes it takes the note. Sometimes it only stays until it knows it is not needed. The town no longer asks what happens to the messages that vanish, whether they are delivered, whether they are read, whether they matter in the way people once expected. That is not the point anymore. Now the shelves are tended, the strings refreshed, the crumbs left carefully. The messages continue. In a corner of the town square, an old man builds what he calls a listening perch. It is a simple structure, a wooden frame, no walls, one chair. Above it hangs a small chime made from bent forks and spoons. He does not explain its purpose, only invites people to sit. Now and then, someone does. Some sit in silence. Others speak softly as if the air might be recording. It becomes one of those odd corners that locals do not talk about but maintain anyway. The chime is never still for long. As the practice of leaving notes becomes commonplace, a few residents begin compiling them. One woman creates a patchwork quilt using cloth messages collected over 2 years. Each square contains a phrase. Sorry for the noise. I kept your letter. The jam was perfect. When displayed at the harvest fair, people stand before it quietly, reading. One man presses a finger to a particular patch and nods, as if confirming something he already suspected. Teenagers begin using the birds for their own brand of mischief. Notes tied to key legs contain riddles, challenges, invented prophecies. One reads, "The baker will drop the loaf at dawn." Another says, "Count the ducks and beware the third." These become the subject of much speculation and several unintended outcomes, including a premature bread sale and a mild duck-related panic. Despite the mischief, a kind of respect holds. Even the prank messages are written with care. No one mocks the practice. The birds are never disturbed, even when they sit idly atop chimney stacks watching. Newcomers to the valley are gently introduced. No pamphlets, no lectures, just a glance toward a windowsill, a nod toward the shelf near the back door. Most understand quickly. One woman, recently arrived from Christchurch, leaves a note her first week. If you are real, thank you for waiting. It disappears within the day. One dry afternoon, a carpenter and a potter build a structure together near the trailhead. It resembles a small post office, complete with cubby holes and a sloped roof, but it is clearly built for birds. Inside are hooks, loops, and gentle resting places. A single instruction is painted across the top beam. Leave what you carry. Soon feathers begin to appear in the boxes, a few seed husks. Once, a child's drawing of a tree with a bird inside, waving. At the end of a dusty lane, an elderly couple maintains a log of every parrot visit, times, direction of arrival, color pattern, any message carried. They treat it as a kind of bird census. Their log is organized by season, and each page ends with a single question. What did we not see? They have no clear answer. They continue recording. A solitary message appears pinned to the church door during a morning service. It says, "Love means letting it fly, even if it never comes back." No one admits to writing it. It is taken down by the pastor and later framed inside his office. Children grow up with the idea that birds might bring more than wind and sound. Some leave gifts in return, shiny buttons, polished stones, half-eaten biscuits wrapped in paper. One writes a poem and sticks it beneath a porch beam. Feathers in the window light carry dreams too small for flight. It vanishes the same night. The baker begins adding bird bread to the shop offerings. Small loaves, unsalted, scattered with seeds. A portion of the proceeds is donated to maintain the message shelter. The birds ignore the bread completely. People buy it anyway. As another winter approaches, some worry that the birds might not return. But they do. In smaller numbers. Slower. Colder. Still they come. And still the messages arrive. One night, during the first frost, a note is found tied to the bell rope in the schoolhouse. It simply reads, "Still here." No one knows who sent it. No one asks. That is enough. The town grows older. Not all at once, not in any dramatic way, but in the slow, deliberate shifts that only become obvious in retrospect. Roofs sag, paint fades. The bakery changes hands. The sign over the old post office finally falls in a windstorm and is not replaced. Yet the messages continue. By now, no one refers to it as an experiment. The parrot post is not news, not novelty. It is simply part of how things work, or rather, how they sometimes work when the conditions are just so. No one expects every note to arrive, but still, they write. New materials enter the tradition. Notebooks are sold with perforated corners labelled "for the birds." One shop begins stocking waxed message wraps in pastel shades. Children are taught how to fold notes into aerodynamic shapes that will not flap too much during flight. A small cottage industry develops around message weights, tiny sewn pouches filled with dried herbs or grains designed to balance light paper in gusty weather. Whether they help is debatable. They smell very nice regardless. A man named Thomas begins keeping a ledger, not of bird deliveries, but of human ones. He walks from house to house asking whether a message has arrived that mattered. He writes down each story carefully in pencil. Sometimes it is a sentence, sometimes a whole conversation. He includes who sent it, if known, and what was done with it after. Some entries are long, others are just a line. She said yes. He was already gone. I made the soup again. The ledger grows thick. Eventually, it is given its own shelf in the bakery, beside the feather-bound recipe book and a stack of carefully dried leaves. It becomes the third most borrowed book in town, just behind the annual seed catalogue and the one about a lost dog that everyone pretends not to cry over. A new child in town invents a game called Listen Post. The rules are vague, but involve waiting quietly until a bird lands nearby. Then the child declares what the bird is thinking. Most statements are simple. I like warm chimneys. That hat looks like a nest. Please stop whistling. Once, after a particularly long pause, the child says, "The bird thinks someone is sorry but has not said so yet." No one speaks for a while after that. Historians still argue whether the entire phenomenon should be considered folklore. One camp insists it is a case of settler improvisation becoming communal mythology. Another insists the practice had roots in indigenous skywatching traditions, adapted, appropriated, misunderstood. A few suggest it is neither history nor myth, but something softer, a practice of attention, a way to stay connected when ordinary tools fail. Back near the ridge, a new perch is erected, simple, cedar wood, no sign, no instructions, just a flat platform beneath a sloped roof. It receives its first message within 3 days, a scrap of cloth stitched with the words, "You did what you could." The cloth is left where it landed. An artist in town begins sketching birds in flight, never from photographs, only from memory or imagination or dream. Her drawings are not realistic. They are exaggerated, long tails, thoughtful eyes, letters wrapped in silk. She exhibits them in the bakery and sells them for seed money. Literally, she is saving up for a small sanctuary plot where tired birds can rest without being asked to carry anything. A farmer ties a message to a fence post. It reads, "You were right about the frost. Thank you." He leaves a small bundle of rosemary beside it. The note remains for weeks, then one morning it is gone. The rosemary is untouched. As another season rounds its corner, the air grows colder again. Mornings are mist-heavy. The wind whistles through eaves and under doors. Still the birds come. One evening, the town gathers, not for a festival, not for a meeting, just to stand outside with lanterns to listen. No music plays, no speeches are made. A few notes are held in gloved hands. A few are released. A Kea swoops overhead, someone gasps, a child smiles, a woman closes her eyes. That night, one message is found resting on the old church windowsill. You were heard. After that quiet lantern gathering beneath the fading stars, something seems to settle over the town, not quite stillness, but a kind of understanding. The birds do not change, they continue to arrive unpredictably, to depart without warning. But the town's gaze shifts again, softer this time, less expectant, more receptive. People begin to leave notes, not only on shelves or windowsills, but in less obvious places, folded messages tucked behind loose bricks, words etched faintly into wood that might one day be sanded smooth, a single line carved into a stone and left by the river. Carry it gently. Children collect feathers not to keep, but to give back. They arrange them in little circles beneath trees, along fences, on the church steps. No one tells them to stop. The mayor, who once publicly referred to the entire tradition as charming nonsense, is later seen bending to add a feather of his own. The tradition reaches nearby towns, slowly at first. A shop in the next valley begins offering free slips of message paper with every purchase. The general store across the ridge stocks little message tins shaped like birds' eggs. One innkeeper hangs a sign at the front desk. If something must be said but cannot be spoken, leave it with us. Some messages return, not to the sender necessarily, but to the place where they are needed. A letter forgotten on a shelf finds its way into the hands of someone grieving. A scrap of song lyrics reappears months later, tied to the same tree where it was once composed. A note believed lost is spotted behind glass in the frame of a painting. One woman writes, "I forgive you," and hides it in a hollow log. It vanishes. Months later, her brother receives a different message, in a different hand. She meant it. A boy who moved away returns for the harvest fair. He brings with him a folded paper, yellowed at the edges, and places it quietly in the church's offering bowl. Later, when no one is looking, the pastor unfolds it. It contains just one line: "I remembered what you taught me." Birds begin to arrive in twos. Sometimes they carry nothing. Other times they both carry copies of the same note. It is unclear whether this is redundancy or choreography. Edwin Maynard, asked for comment, merely smiles and says, "Perhaps the birds are building their own archive now." He might not be wrong. A new perch is built at the edge of the orchard, where the air smells like apples and the fence always leans slightly to the west. It is constructed entirely from salvaged materials, old beams, a broken wheel, fragments of shelving from the first schoolhouse. Someone leaves a sign beneath it. This post knows more than most. Nearby, a child places a message in a clay pot and buries it halfway into the soil. When asked why, the child replies, "Sometimes roots need messages too." The next week, a parrot is seen standing atop the pot, quietly preening. Artists come, they sketch, they paint, they write. They ask questions the town cannot answer. Some stay long enough to try. Others leave notes instead of critiques. One visitor leaves a bundle of feathers shaped into a spiral with a note in the center that reads, "If this is a story, let it keep telling itself." It does. In winter, someone finds a small wooden box tucked under the eaves of the bakery. Inside, dozens of folded messages, some familiar, some never seen before. One reads, "You made it." The box is resealed and returned. More perches appear, hand-carved, improvised, painted, weathered. One is adorned with bells that chime in the wind. Another is surrounded by stones arranged like petals. Each is visited, not regularly, not predictably, but often enough that no one questions their purpose. At the beginning of spring, the town's oldest resident places a message on her doorstep. She does not tell anyone what it says. The next morning, it is gone. In its place, a feather, a sprig of mint, and a single word carved faintly into the wood. "Stay." and for a little while longer, they do. Winter thickens. The hills wear their frost like a warning. Wood smoke settles into the air, and the sky pulls down its shutters early each day. Footsteps leave impressions that last, and the ground crunches under every decision. The birds arrive less frequently now, slower in flight, heavier with weather. Still they come. The townspeople adjust without ceremony. Message notes are wrapped in layers, cloth-bound, wax-sealed, tucked into pouches, lined with wool. A tailor begins stitching small satchels with buttons, not for fashion, but so that birds can carry something soft and dry. They are not widely used, still they sell. A few messages turn up, frozen in place, wedged into fence posts, buried in snowdrifts, stuck to the sides of barns like they had tried to land, and gave up. When thawed, most are illegible. That does not stop anyone from keeping them. One such note, recovered in January, contains only a single letter. The letter is L. Theories abound. Love, lost, listen, left, late. The note is displayed in the bakery under glass, beside a cinnamon loaf and the current tally of delivered crumbs. This is also the season for remembering. Messages are written not for sending, but for preserving. Whole pages are copied in longhand and tucked into books. Others are burned in the hearth with quiet intention. A few are buried, ceremonially, with stones placed carefully around the resting place, forming small circles that look like punctuation marks in the snow. The children take to storytelling. Not of birds exactly, but of the messages themselves. Who wrote them? Who might have received them? What might have happened in between? The more absurd the tale, the better. One group performs a play in the schoolhouse about a parrot who forgets a message for 50 years, remembers suddenly in a storm and delivers it to the wrong address where it nonetheless saves a life. There is singing. One of the props is a wheel of cheese. The local librarian creates a display titled Unsent, Unfound, Unforgotten. It features messages never retrieved, stories that inspired new ones, and objects that accompanied deliveries: thread, bark, a spoon, a lock of hair, a particularly shiny pebble that reflects light in curious ways. A small notebook sits on a pedestal nearby, open to a page labeled Add Your Own. It fills quickly. No one speaks of ending the practice, but fewer messages fly in winter. Instead, there is tending. To the shelves, to the memories, to the gentle sense that something unseen is still moving. Sometimes the birds simply sit, feathers fluffed, eyes closed, staying just long enough to be noticed. Their stillness feels like punctuation. One morning, a boy finds a feather in his coat pocket. He does not remember putting it there. There is no message, just the feather. He shows it to his sister, who says, "That means you will know something soon." She says it with such confidence that he believes her. A new child born during the quiet season is given a middle name no one quite understands. When asked, the mother says only, "It came on a Tuesday." The rest of the town accepts this without further question. Historians still argue what role the messages played, whether they filled a gap in communication or in spirit, whether they are best understood as community resilience, symbolic expression, or a prolonged and poetic accident. Some point to the cultural imprint, the carved signs, the storybooks, the way even strangers to the town lower their voices when mentioning the birds. A single note found tucked into the frame of a well mirror offers no resolution. Maybe we needed something to believe in. This worked. And so it continues. Someone strings colored cloth along the ridge, not for any reason, just color, just motion. A week later, a parrot lands nearby and stays for nearly an hour. When it leaves, it carries a strip of blue. The bakery begins to close earlier, but leaves a message board outside, chalked anew each morning. Sometimes it contains an old note. Sometimes a quote from a child. Once, just a question. What if they are writing back in ways we forgot how to read? No answer is recorded. Spring waits behind the cold, not rushing, but not hesitating either. And when it does arrive, the birds return not with fanfare, but with the familiar flutter of something halfway between memory and meaning. On the church windowsill, another message appears. You were never alone. In the dim hours of late winter, a curious stillness moves through the town. Not a silence exactly, but a waiting. People take longer to tie their boots. Cups of tea cool slower by the window. Messages, when written, are no longer hurried. Fewer are sent, more are saved. There is in the pace of things a growing understanding that some words need time to settle before they are asked to travel. One morning a parrot lands on the frame of the bell tower and simply stays. It does not carry anything. It does not leave anything behind. The pastor watches it from below, unsure whether to speak. The bird eventually departs without sound, leaving behind only the imprint of its feet in the frost. That afternoon, the pastor writes something in his journal he does not read back. The town begins to mark time not by calendar, but by message. That was the week the red parrot brought the song. The day before the rosemary feather. A month after the note in the puddle. Time softens. People grow comfortable measuring it in memory. One old man writes notes he never expects to be taken. He pins them to the inside of his coat so they are warm, even if unread. One says, "You were more than enough." Another says, "Tell the wind thank you." When he passes, his coat is found with 3 notes still inside. All are blank, except for the edges, which are worn smooth, as if held too often to remain untouched. The schoolteacher organizes a new kind of lesson. She calls it message meditation. The children are asked to write something true and small, something they believe would be worth carrying, even if no one ever reads it. The exercise changes every week. Sometimes they write on pine bark. Sometimes they speak the message aloud and release it with a feather into the river. One boy whispers, "I think the trees remember." There is no correction, only listening. In the hills beyond town, a woman finds a message in a tree hollow. It is faded, torn, and tied with a piece of cloth that has clearly seen seasons pass. The ink is still legible. It reads, "Try again when the sky feels wider." She does not know what it means. She smiles anyway. Artists from far away begin arriving with questions. They want to document, interview, exhibit. Most leave with sketches and sound recordings. A few leave confused, unsure if what they have encountered was history, rumor, or ritual. The town provides no definitive answer. They are welcome to visit. The notes will be waiting, or they will not. One historian, visiting in early March, requests access to all message-related artifacts. He receives a small pile of handwritten journals, a box of feathers, 3 photographs, and a loaf of bread. The bread is warm, the feathers are tied with string, the photos are out of focus. He stays 3 extra days and writes nothing. The children build a shrine of sorts, not a religious one, just a place. A nook in the base of an old tree filled with soft things, ribbons, marbles, moss, letters folded into impossibly small squares. No adults disturb it. Sometimes new things appear, a button, a shell, a note that reads, "Still listening." The bakery, having become something between archive and gossip hub, adds a new chalkboard to its entrance. Messages we wish we had sent. It fills quickly. Phrases are smudged and re-added. One is simply a question mark. Another, a name written backwards. The board is wiped clean each Monday. No one minds. The act of writing is enough. Toward the final thaw, when ice begins to release its hold on branches and the air begins to smell faintly of possibility, a parrot lands on the windowsill of a woman who has been waiting. She offers it her note. The bird does not take it. Instead, It drops a note of its own, then departs with only the faintest rustle. Her hands tremble as she opens the message. It contains no words, only the drawing of a path leading away from a house with an open door. She leaves the house that evening. Not far, just enough to stand in the clearing where the moonlight touches the fence post and the wind no longer feels like a closing. The next village over has begun its own experiments, not with birds, at least not initially. Someone suggests using goats. The idea lasts 3 days, one ruined vegetable patch, and a hastily rescinded council vote. Then someone else proposes sheep, fitted with small message pouches. This too proves optimistic. Most of the sheep wander off. One is found months later, carrying a message that reads, "Lost," which some take as a joke, others as divine commentary. Eventually, they try pigeons. A few homesteads had kept them for years, more for companionship than communication. But the birds prove surprisingly effective at short-range routes. Small notes tucked beneath feathers, tiny cloth satchels. The town announces their first pigeon relay demonstration to moderate excitement and cautious rain. It ends with one pigeon flying directly into a clothesline and a second delivering a recipe for soup rather than the intended land deed. Still, the consensus is that it might work, if not asked to do too much. Back in the original town, the one that first entrusted hope to birds with questionable reliability, the news arrives slowly. A few stories shared at the bakery. A mention in a footnote of the seed catalogue. One parrot even returns with a message folded unusually tight and sealed with a wax stamp in the shape of a pear. The note reads, "We are watching, we are wondering, thank you for the sky." The message is added to the town archive. Historians still argue whether the introduction of rival systems led to competition or simply reflected the spread of imagination. Some point out that the use of animals for communication was neither new nor particularly eccentric. What remains unique, they say, is the response. The way the original town allowed failure to be part of the ritual. The way no one expected success but celebrated it anyway. A young girl, upon hearing about the sheep, writes a message and ties it to a small wooden figure shaped like a ram. She places it on the bakery windowsill and waits. 2 days later, it is gone. In its place, a smooth stone with 3 rings of colour and a petal pressed against the grain. No note. She declares this a successful reply. A regional magazine publishes an article titled "Improvised Infrastructures, Animal Relay Systems in Colonial Settlements." It includes diagrams, quotations, and a sidebar of humorous anecdotes, though the jokes seem oddly reverent. One caption reads, "Parrot with partial mail memory, frequently returned to sender with extra notes." Another quote from a settler, "I do not always trust the birds, but I trust the feeling they give me." That line gets underlined, clipped, passed around. It shows up later scrawled across the wall of the bakery, written in flour by an anonymous hand. Someone adds beneath it, "Feeling delivered." In the hills, rival attempts at bird-based systems continue. One township introduces color-coded harnesses for their pigeons. Another tries to train ducks with middling enthusiasm. Reports of ducks delivering anything meaningful are dubious at best, though one did reportedly arrive wearing a note that read, "Not the usual route." The original town watches all this with interest but no urgency. Their own birds continue to come and go, not as messengers exactly, but as something stranger and quieter, carriers of intent, of mood, of fragments and echoes. Some bring messages, some bring reminders. One delivers a single seed. It is planted. No one expects it to grow, but still it is planted. A boy builds a map of the roots, not real ones. Imagine paths between perch and shelf, between barn and boulder, between the swing by the river and the empty chair beside the blacksmith's shed. The map makes no sense to anyone else, but it is beautiful, and it is pinned to the bakery wall. A visitor offers to buy it. The boy says it is not for sale. It still needs more paths, he explains. A note arrives with no words, only an arrow drawn in ink and pointing west. Another arrives pointing east. A third arrives without an arrow at all. These are placed together beneath the town bell. A child passing by says, "They make sense if you tilt your head." No one argues. The messages continue regardless of weather, rivalry, or reason. Some vanish, some return. Some leave traces, scents, silence, the sense of having just missed something. And once, just once, 2 birds arrive at once, each carrying the same note written in different handwriting. It says, "You were right to try." After the message with the pear seal arrives, the townspeople spend the better part of a week speculating. No one claims to know where it came from. No one has seen a stamp like it before. Some suggest it is a joke. Others think it might be a gesture of gratitude from a child in another village. A few believe it is something else entirely, an acknowledgement not from another town, but from the birds themselves. "You laugh," one woman says, "but how do you know they do not have opinions?" The discussion dissolves without resolution, as these things usually do, replaced by the gentle rhythm of daily tasks. Life goes on. Notes still appear. Birds still land, look, and leave. There is talk of organizing a shared perch system between villages. A small committee is formed. They draw diagrams, consult almanacs, and suggest standardized message formats. Nothing comes of it. The birds, it turns out, do not recognize committees. Instead, the people adapt. A potter begins embedding miniature notes into the bases of cups and bowls, glazed over, unreadable, visible only as shadows. He does not tell anyone what they say. Buyers ask, but he only smiles and says, "They are not meant to be opened, only carried." His cups become popular. People hold them differently, more carefully. The rival village holds a bird day. It involves music, speeches, and a cake shaped like a pigeon. A few birds attend, though none are confirmed messengers. One eats part of the frosting and later drops a feather into a musician's tuba. This is considered a blessing. Back in the original town, someone leaves a message on the baker's back step. "Thank you for feeding the ones who carry what we do not." It is kept in the till for 3 days before being moved to the windowsill, where it disappears during a light rain. The school adds a new question to its morning exercises. What do you wish would arrive today? Answers vary. Some say letters, others say news. One child writes, "A decision." Another says, "Anything that understands." No one says nothing. A message appears written on cloth, tucked between stones at the river bend. It reads, "I still think about that Tuesday." The river, asked for comment, offers only the sound of moving water. Another day, a bird arrives with a ring tied to its leg. Not a wedding band, but something older, more worn, with scratches on the inside. It is left on the town's central post for a week. Then one morning, it is gone. No one claims it. No one asks. People begin describing their dreams more freely, especially those with birds. "I saw one speaking," says an older man, "but I could not hear the words." "Mine brought a bell," says a younger woman. "It rang once, then vanished." Children start drawing dreams on their chalk slates before lessons. One sketch shows a flock of birds spelling out the word "remember" against a purple sky. The teacher saves it. The town's small printing press begins including message reprints in the local newsletter. 1 per issue. No commentary. Just the note, printed in neat black type at the bottom corner of the final page. Submissions are accepted with no criteria. and the selection process is unclear. A few favorites include, "I'm trying to be less afraid," "The thing you left behind is waiting," "This was not a waste." The newsletter is clipped more often now, pinned on walls, folded into journals, tucked into pockets. A visitor from the coast arrives with a box of their own notes, written over years, never sent. They ask if the town might help. No one asks what they mean. The baker gives them a tin to keep them dry. The librarian shows them the message archive. A child leads them to the ridge where the wind always returns. 3 notes are taken. 1 is left. The rest are carried into the hills. Later that week, a new message appears in the hollow beneath the big pine. "Thank you for the lift." And so it continues, between birds and hills, between strangers and silence, between hope and whatever it is that happens when we try, even without knowing why. It begins with a rustling at the bakery's back gate. Nothing dramatic, just the soft shuffle of wings and a faint tapping on the wooden frame. When the baker opens the door, there is a key sitting on a flour sack, staring with quiet intent. Around its leg is tied a torn scrap of what used to be a sermon. The ink has run. The handwriting is familiar. The baker reads the remaining words, just 4 of them, barely legible. "Do not blame the..." What exactly is not to be blamed remains unclear. The message joins a growing pile of partially preserved notes in the unfinished thoughts drawer beside the teacups. It is not the first to come from a place of confusion. It will not be the last. Shortly after, a rumor spreads through the valley. Some Kea have begun shredding documents. Not just any paper either, ledgers, records, official notices. A magistrate finds the corner of a land deed tucked under his porch, chewed to lace. A teacher opens a drawer to discover her attendance sheets nibbled beyond recognition. A census is lost. A wedding license goes missing. A set of tax forms returns peppered with perfectly round holes. Panic does not set in exactly, but concern settles like dust. Not everyone is amused. A meeting is called. It is formal, seated, and largely unproductive. Notes are passed more than read aloud. The idea of restricting bird access to public buildings is floated and immediately mocked. One man suggests creating decoy documents to distract the birds. A woman counters that the birds may prefer the truth. The room goes quiet. The press gets hold of it. A regional column appears. "Are our birds erasing us?" The author recounts the shredded documents, the missing sermons, the feathers left in folders. It is written in good humor, mostly. A few readers do not find it funny. Historians still argue whether this was a moment of avian rebellion or simply the natural behavior of bored parrots. Kea, after all, have long been known to dismantle windscreen wipers and open lunchboxes. That they might take offense to bureaucracy is almost poetic. The term the Great Kea Controversy is coined in jest. It sticks. To some, the destruction is inconvenient. To others, it is something more, a reminder that even the messages we keep may eventually come undone. The townspeople adapt. Ledgers are recopied with extra margins. Important papers are tucked into wooden boxes or tied to heavier stones. Sermons are rewritten from memory. One pastor begins hiding his drafts in the folds of his cassock. Another leans into the chaos and reads only what the birds have left untouched. At the bakery, a woman finds a half-eaten note beneath a crate of apples. It says, "Do not forget the small." What the small thing is remains a mystery. She tapes the note to the oven. The words feel complete enough. Children start writing intentionally vague messages to see what the birds do with them. Something is coming. Look behind you. It already happened. When returned, half-eaten, or partly delivered. They take on new life as riddles, fortunes, or small-town mysteries. One boy collects them in a notebook labeled Kea Wisdom. Eventually, someone claims to have trained a bird to edit rather than destroy. The story is charming but suspicious. No one else can replicate the result. The bird in question refuses interviews. Meanwhile, the town's relationship with the birds remains affectionate, cautious but affectionate. Offerings are left on perches, crumbs, shiny buttons, bits of ribbon. Messages become more compact, more symbolic. Drawings replace paragraphs. Stamps become symbols. The less said, the better. A new exhibit opens in the library's rear hall, unsent, unfinished, unforgotten. It features shredded notes, reconstructed phrases, and a display case labeled possibly important, but we will never know. The community contributes. One woman donates a message reduced to a single syllable. Another donates a message that was never written, only imagined. One night, a child dreams of a parrot flying in circles above the town, dropping letters that explode into laughter. He wakes laughing too, he tells his mother. She writes it down and leaves it by the stove. That morning, it is gone. Another note appears days later, tied to the church railing. Not all stories require full sentences. It is signed with a single feather. Not long after the note on the church railing appears, a child declares that the birds are editing history. The phrase catches on. It is repeated in the bakery, whispered in the schoolyard, scrawled into the margins of shopping lists. It becomes a phrase both satirical and sincere, humorous in intent, serious in undertone. The notion that the birds might be choosing what remains unsettles some and reassures others. If history is fragile, perhaps it is best kept in wings where nothing gathers dust. A mural is painted on the east wall of the general store. It depicts a flock of key rearranging scrolls in the sky, one parrot perched thoughtfully on a typewriter that has no ribbon. Beneath the clouds, a laundry line of half-destroyed notes flutters in the breeze. The mural is unsigned. The store owner claims not to know who painted it, though he admits that someone left a parrot feather wedged under the door. The children vote to preserve the mural permanently. The vote is not binding, but no one paints over it. Elsewhere, the town printer begins creating paper stock with partial text, unfinished sentences, half-formed questions, empty spaces where context might have lived. The idea is to encourage interpretation, or perhaps surrender. Either way, the papers become popular. They are often sent blank. They are often returned with feathers. A musician composes a piece titled Letter Without Sender. It is performed only once, inside the town hall, with all the windows open. The score includes pauses of varying lengths, soft tapping to mimic talons, and a whistled refrain based on bird call. One member of the audience swears a parrot outside echoed the final note. The performance is not recorded. No one minds. At the school, students are encouraged to compose messages that do not need meaning. Some write full paragraphs that spiral into nonsense. Others submit single punctuation marks. One child turns in a slip of paper with a tiny drawing of a potato. When asked to explain, he says only, "It is thinking." The teacher accepts it with a nod. The town's archive of fragmented messages becomes an informal pilgrimage site. People visit from nearby settlements, even distant ones, to see what was almost said. One visitor from Wellington leaves behind a message that reads, "I came looking for clarity. I found crumbs." It is placed in the display labeled "Expected Something Else." The birds remain constant. They arrive when they choose. They take what they wish. They return what they can, or what they feel like returning. One parrot, previously unknown to the town, drops a ribbon onto the mayor's hat during a walk through the square. The mayor keeps it pinned to his lapel for the rest of the day. No one asks why. The idea of the birds choosing what endures begins to influence other traditions. At a wedding, the couple includes a small perch beside the guest book. Guests are invited to write their wishes on scraps of cloth and leave them for the birds. By the end of the night, 3 have been taken, 2 flutter to the ground, and 1 is found lodged in a nearby tree with the words, "Hold hands when it snows." A newborn is named Feather, not for any particular bird, but for the feeling her parents say they had when they first saw her, like something light had landed without needing to explain why. They do not expect her to carry messages, only to listen when one arrives. A fire briefly threatens the ridge. Volunteers work through the night. The wind shifts. The town is spared. In the morning, a charred post is found upright at the edge of the ash line. At its base, a message, scorched at the edges, still legible. "We carry what we can. You carried enough." It is not known who wrote it, or if the birds delivered it. But no one questions its place. Later that week, a group of children builds a message catcher out of sticks and cloth. It resembles a net, though no one intends to trap anything. They set it on the hill and sit nearby, waiting. Hours pass, clouds gather, a single feather drifts into the catcher. The children cheer, they leave it there. The following day, another feather is found beside it, and then a third. Eventually, someone adds a message to the catcher. "If you need to rest, this place is kind." It stays. And still, the messages move, broken, unfinished, chewed, mended. Each one a fragment, a suggestion, an offering. Some make it whole. Some are made whole only after they are carried. There is a point at which no one can remember when it started. The records, such as they are, do not agree. Some say it began with a delivery gone astray. Others recall a message never meant for delivery at all. A few argue it started much earlier, before even the first parrot was coaxed into carrying string and ink across the hills. Before the notes, before the bakery shelf, before the words were ever written down. It is not about beginning anymore. It is about continuation. One spring morning, a traveler arrives in the valley. She carries no map. She has heard whispers of the bird messengers, the drifting notes, the silence that speaks back. She carries in her coat pocket a bundle of paper fragments gathered from 4 different towns. Half a poem, a receipt, a torn list, with the word milk underlined 3 times. She visits the archive, contributes her fragments, and leaves a blank piece in return. The librarian accepts it with a smile and writes in the logbook, "Unspoken, but offered." Meanwhile, another theory gains popularity, quietly, half seriously. The idea that not all messages are written by people, that some may originate with the birds, that perhaps the parrots, having absorbed so much human story, have begun crafting reflections of their own. This is not widely accepted, but it is not dismissed either. One such note, found in the crook of a tree, reads, "The nests are safe. Thank you for the sky." It is in neat, looping script. The paper is folded expertly. No one recognizes the hand. Theories multiply. Some claim the birds are acting as translators between people and the land. Others believe they are memory collectors, archiving emotion. One child insists they are writing dreams on behalf of those who forget too quickly. She says this with chocolate on her face and absolute certainty. Historians still argue whether any of it matters. Some maintain that the parrot male episode was exaggerated, a few coincidences woven into something bigger. A curiosity, a local myth, a gentle exaggeration dressed in nostalgia. Others believe it is a lens into colonial adaptation, rural loneliness, improvised networks of connection. Still others say the truth does not lie in the messages themselves, but in the way people responded to them. The archive contains hundreds of notes now, some full letters, some single words. One is just an exclamation mark drawn in red pencil. Another is an empty envelope with the word "someday" written on the flap. A shelf is reserved for the inexplicable, objects delivered without explanation or context. A green bead, a lock of hair, 3 buttons of mismatched size, a tiny scrap of music notated in an unfamiliar key. These are stored together not as artifacts but as participants, as if they too are still deciding what they mean. A new librarian arrives, young and curious. She does not alter the system. Instead, she listens. She reads the logbooks aloud to the empty archive after hours. Occasionally, she answers the notes. She writes back to them and leaves her responses unsigned. One of her replies is found tucked under a floorboard during repairs. It reads, "You mattered more than you knew." The floor is patched. The note is returned to its place. Out on the hills, someone ties a ribbon to a branch. On it, stitched in careful thread, "Send nothing, I just wanted to try." The ribbon remains through wind, sun, and one early snowfall. In the spring, a parrot is seen hovering near it. Then another, and then none. Someone paints it on the bakery wall. "Send nothing, I just wanted to try." It stays there, collecting flour dust and admiration. Visitors ask how long the tradition has lasted. No one answers clearly. Some say 50 years, others say less. A few claim it was always here, waiting to be named. A teacher writes on the board one morning, "What is a message?" The class answers with drawings, gestures, fragments of remembered phrases. The board is never erased. It becomes the backdrop for all other lessons. A message appears above the school bell. Not all signals need a reply. No one claims it, but everyone reads it. And so the town continues, not with facts, but with fragments, not with order, but with openness. The birds come and go, the messages rise and fall, some remain unread, some rewrite themselves. And always tucked into windows, hidden in bark, folded inside someone's pocket. Words carried, words found, words still waiting. Not far from the edge of town, near the bend in the river where the willows lean low enough to whisper, someone sets up a glass jar with a handwritten label, "Return if needed, take if not." Inside, a handful of folded messages, some with dates, some without, some in careful cursive, others in what might be a child's first attempt at writing, a few blank, each folded precisely the same way, as if the ritual were part of the meaning. The jar is left alone for a week. When someone checks it again, 3 messages are gone. One new one has appeared. It reads, "You were not the only one." It is placed back into the jar. A lid is never used. Nearby, a bench is carved with phrases collected from bird-delivered notes. Still watching. No map needed. Ask again. The wood begins to weather. The words blur. Moss grows over the grain. Still, people sit. The archive expands, not with filing cabinets or boxes, but with whispers. People begin to speak their messages aloud before releasing them, sometimes into the air, sometimes into a drawer, sometimes into their own hands. It becomes a practice to breathe the words first, to give them presence before trusting them to travel. The young librarian continues her private dialogue with the notes. She adds footnotes in tiny handwriting at the bottom of displayed messages. Observations, interpretations, occasionally corrections. A note that once read, "I miss you when it rains," is later updated to include, in the bottom corner, also in fog sometimes. This is not seen as interference, it is seen as collaboration. Artists begin creating interpretive pieces from partial notes, a sculpture of wings formed from charred paper, a painting where each brushstroke is a letter from a sentence too long to finish. One installation, displayed under the school's eaves, consists of thread-connecting phrases from unrelated messages. It makes no discernible shape. People stare at it anyway. A musician records a series of compositions inspired by bird arrivals. Each begins with silence, each ends with a single note held just a little too long. The titles are all based on real messages. I remember the warmth of your shoes. The river knew before we did. Tell the stars I said sorry. They are played over the bakery's radio during slow mornings. Customers linger longer than usual. One afternoon, a child finds a nest lined with what appears to be message paper. No words are visible, only folds, edges, hints of graphite. The child names the nest library. The name sticks. A visiting scholar attempts to catalogue the notes. He develops a classification system, Type A, direct messages with clear recipients. Type B, indirect, poetic or symbolic messages. Type C, fragments, or those that seem to be dreams. The archive humorously labels his system Bird Taxonomy, Attempt 1, and files it under fiction. The scholar does not mind. He leaves behind a message of his own. Better have been read than sorted. Someone proposes a ceremony for lost notes, a place where unread messages can be left with the understanding they may never be found, but never be discarded. A stone alcove is created near the school's herb garden. Notes placed there are rolled tightly and wrapped in ribbon. The ribbons change color with the seasons. The alcove is never empty. One winter evening, a bird arrives with a message that has already been burned at the edges. It is barely intact. What remains is enough. You did not fail. It is left unframed on the bakery shelf. A few residents begin composing what they call pre-notes, messages written not for a particular moment, but for a future self who might need them. One woman writes a series of 12, sealed with different flowers. She leaves instructions that they be read only on days when it is hard to believe in soft things. So far she has read 3. Others follow suit. The practice spreads. Pre-notes are stored in tins, jars, even hollowed-out books. Some are left for strangers. One appears tucked into a library atlas on the page for Tasmania. It says, "Go anyway." And always, the birds remain, not quite messengers, not quite scribes, but something in between. Carriers of weightless burdens, bearers of half-finished thoughts, each one a question, each one a kind of answer, each one reminding the town of what it had long since learned, that not all history is written in ink, that not all messages need a destination, that not every story needs to end to be remembered. The last official parrot delivery was not a grand affair. There were no trumpets, no declaration in the town square, no paper hat on the bird. Just a quiet Tuesday, a light breeze, and a message that arrived slightly late, as was customary. It was delivered to the magistrate's assistant, though not directly. The parrot landed on a bakery shelf, left the message under a loaf of bread, and flew off again before anyone could offer so much as a breadcrumb. The assistant retrieved the note later that day, sandwiched between 2 loaves of rye, smelling faintly of cinnamon and dust. The message read, "Final delivery confirmed. Route now resting." No one knew who wrote it. The handwriting was unfamiliar. It was dated 3 days earlier. The assistant shrugged, folded it carefully, and placed it into the ongoing curiosities drawer beneath the teacups. After that, the birds did not stop coming. They simply stopped carrying, or at least they carried differently. Some still arrived with feathers braided with thread, some with pieces of dried herbs or ribbons in their beaks. But the era of leg-tied notes and parcel string had faded. What remained was presence. The Society for Avian Dispatch Integrity, once fastidious in its records and reverent about its experiments, quietly disbanded. Its final meeting included tea, laughter, and a motion to rename the minute's feathered impressions. The motion passed unanimously. No one kept the notes. Edwin Maynard, now white-haired and slower in step, donated his final logbook to the town archive. The last entry simply read, "Last flight observed, intention unclear, message unknown, felt complete." That sentence is etched on a small plaque beside the archive's reading bench. The disappearance of formal parrot mail did not bring sadness. It brought a kind of completion, like finishing a letter and sealing the envelope. Not everything is meant to last as it began. Still, the town noticed when the last known message parrot, a green key with one white feather on its tail, stopped visiting. It had been seen weekly, perched near the school roof, observing lessons. Sometimes it bobbed its head during spelling exercises. Other times it flew away mid-recitation. Its final appearance was during a spring storm, wings soaked, eyes unbothered. It perched beside the bell tower, shook off the rain, and left behind a note tucked into the wood. "Do not wait, just write." It was signed with a single small footprint. The note was laminated and placed inside the school's lost and found drawer. Children still check it regularly. The magistrate, curious, attempted to formally retire the parrot post. He drafted a notice, signed and sealed, and pinned it to the board outside his office. It vanished within the hour. Someone suggested that the birds had rejected the closure. Others said it was the wind. A few claimed the message never existed at all. The magistrate never brought it up again. In the months that followed, the town adjusted. The shelf at the bakery remained, though it grew more decorative than functional. Some notes still appeared, usually anonymous, sometimes hopeful, occasionally nonsense. A favorite note read, "The muffins knew all along." It was pinned beside the cinnamon rolls. The librarian updated the archive's classification system to include a new category: echoes. These were notes that seemed less like statements and more like reflections, sentences that arrived as if remembering something unsaid. They were often unsigned. Many were half complete. One was just a question. "What do you think I meant?" A teacher assigned an essay asking students to imagine the last thing a bird might have wanted to say. One wrote, "Thank you for being so noisy. It made finding you easier." Another wrote, "We never needed words. You just needed to watch." Both were read aloud at the Spring Festival. Visitors continued to arrive, some seeking folklore, others history. Most left with fewer answers and more questions than they came with. Many wrote messages of their own and left them in jars, cracks, boxes, ledges. The town made no promises, only offered places to put things. The birds still flew, not with certainty, not with messages, but with presence. Some believed they still carried something unseen, a memory perhaps, or intention, or that strange weight of moments shared across time by creatures that never spoke the same language, yet somehow understood enough. And once, much later, long after the parrot mail had faded into something remembered rather than known, a child found a note under her pillow. It was small, handwritten in careful print, no feather, no signature. It read, "You were the message." In the weeks following the disappearance of the Green Key, townspeople begin marking time in new ways. Before the last visit, and after the last flight, become quiet turns of phrase. They are not spoken with sorrow, only recognition, a seasonal change, something finished but not gone. One resident, a clockmaker by trade, crafts a timepiece with no numbers. Instead, the face is etched with fragments of bird-carried messages. Try again. Not this way? Almost. Wait. The clock ticks regardless. No one can tell what it means. Many agree that is the point. The bakery keeps the shelf, now a curated tribute. Notes are rotated weekly, some old, some new. One reads, "Not all endings need punctuation." It is placed beside the sugar tongs. Local school children are tasked with drawing their favorite memory from the parrot post years. One illustrates a bird carrying a banner that reads, "We noticed." Another sketches a tree full of envelopes. One child, age 7, turns in a single blank sheet of paper with a dot in the middle. "What is this?" asks the teacher. "That is where the bird landed," the child says. The message came later. The page is displayed on the classroom door. A retired postmaster donates a small brass whistle once used to signal message collection. It has not been blown in over a decade. He requests it be placed in the town archive's quiet tools drawer. It rests alongside a pencil stub, a broken stamp pad, and a coil of string once tied around a very hopeful sandwich. One night, the bell in the tower chimes once at an unexpected hour. No one admits to ringing it. The wind is calm. A parrot is seen perched near the top. Moments later, then gone again. A new message appears the following morning in the bakery. "You heard that too, right?" It is unsigned. The archive continues to evolve. New visitors leave fragments of their own histories. A page torn from a diary. A receipt with the total circled 3 times. A torn matchbox cover with the words "Tell them" written in ink. One envelope contains only a tiny shell and the word "closer." These are filed under continued sentences. Maynard, though retired, is often seen walking the old delivery paths. He stops at familiar posts, squints at branches, occasionally mutters small greetings to the wind. He is not always alone. Sometimes a bird watches him, sometimes it does not. His final contribution to the archive is a simple sketch, a bird in flight above a dotted line that leads nowhere in particular. The caption reads, "Direction optional, effort eternal." It is framed without ceremony. The town holds a modest gathering on the anniversary of the first recorded delivery. Not a celebration, more a shared acknowledgement. There is bread, there is tea. Someone reads old messages aloud until dusk. A single lantern is lit and left in the town square. It is found the next morning with a feather beside it. The phrase, "You were the message," is repeated more often now. Not as a riddle, but as reassurance. It appears on the library steps in chalk, in a letterpress print hung above the hearth, whispered by the teacher as she passes a quiet student their journal, printed on a slip of paper tied to a lamppost, fluttering in the breeze. And always, birds still come, no longer messengers, not really, just visitors now, witnesses perhaps, or companions. Sometimes they land without cause. Sometimes they sit near the places where notes used to be left. Sometimes they simply fly by, casting shadows across the tiles and rooftops, as if checking in. No one expects them to carry anything anymore. But still some people write, just in case. A woman tucks a note into the fold of her coat, though no bird is nearby. It reads, "If you are watching, I am still listening." Later that day, she finds a pebble on her porch. It is heart-shaped and smooth. She does not call it a message. She keeps it anyway. Another man begins writing messages in invisible ink. "If they are meant to be read," he says, "they will be." He leaves them in sunlit places. And in the spring, when the winds change and blossoms begin pressing gently against the town's windows, a small girl stands on her back step and whispers into the wind, "I know you are out there." A feather drifts past, caught in a current of something old, something still going. It lands quietly, with no note. None needed. The archive no longer fits on a single shelf. It had, for years, made do with modest drawers, thin folders, one basket of ribbon, and a rolling file cart someone had once used to store tea. Now, messages arrive from places far beyond the valley, postmarked from cities, ferried in by strangers who have heard only pieces of the story. Some are curious, others are reverent. Most begin their letters the same way. I do not know if this belongs, but the librarian always responds the same way, by filing the note gently among the others in a drawer labeled Willing Contributions. There is no hierarchy of truth here. The messages are not judged, they are simply included. One envelope arrives with no return address, sealed with dried honey. Inside, a folded scrap of bark with the words, "The bee forgives you." It is added to the Ambiguous Kindnesses section. The bakery continues to host its message wall. Tourists sometimes ask if it is performance art. Locals smile, say it is more like a weather report, a daily check-in with whatever is drifting through the air. Some messages are seasonal. The pears are ready. It snowed on the ridge. There is a smell of lightning today. Others are not. He asked after you. The silence was helpful. Keep naming the stars. Each is removed at dusk and stored in a box beneath the counter. The baker says nothing about what happens to them. Some believe they are baked into bread, others think they are burned in the oven for warmth. The truth, most agree, is less important than the ritual. Children begin building their own archives, shoeboxes, lunch tins, hollow books. They write messages with no sender, no recipient, and hide them in plain sight. A lunchbox beneath the slide, a canning jar behind the library steps, a backpack pocket left unzipped. Many of the notes read, "I was here." A man in his 80s who has lived in the valley his entire life writes one message every day on the same bench. He brings a clipboard, a pen, and a thermos of tea. Sometimes he writes full paragraphs, sometimes just a word. When he finishes, he tears the paper in half. One half goes into his coat, the other is left on the bench. No one knows what is written. The pages are always gone by evening. He calls it letting the sky read. The school's curriculum evolves. Students are now taught message literacy. This includes how to write with sincerity, how to read with generosity, and how to interpret without needing resolution. Assignments include writing messages in clay, whispering letters to a breeze, and drawing metaphors that birds might understand. One student submits a leaf with a fingerprint in ink. The teacher gives full marks. Historians still argue. Some cite the message tradition as the most culturally cohesive oral history the region has produced. Others complain that it is unverifiable, unarchivable, and far too poetic to be taken seriously. A minority believe it is a form of shared delusion, rooted in desperation and weather. The town, meanwhile, keeps writing. Messages now appear on rocks, etched faintly, on rooftops traced in flour. In the arrangement of laundry on lines, sheets for silence, shirts for joy, trousers for confusion. One child spells, "I miss you" in the frost on a window. A parrot is seen watching. The elder librarian begins preparing the final drawer. It is not a literal end, just a place for messages that feel like conclusions, resolutions, affirmations, acknowledgements. It includes one letter that reads, "I will stop asking, I know you knew," and another written in pencil on the back of a ferry ticket, "This was worth the wait." A windstorm passes through the valley one night. In the morning, the bakery's shelf is bare, not broken, not stolen, just cleared. A feather is found resting where the last note had been. Someone writes, "Maybe that was the reply." The feather is pinned to the message board. No one moves it. Another spring arrives. Green spills down the hills like something remembered. A new family moves into the old schoolhouse. They find a message tucked in the wall behind the hearth, written in a hand none of them recognize. It reads, "Leave a place better than it missed you." They hang it above the doorway. The birds continue, less as symbols now, more as selves, still curious, still observant. They land where they please. They carry nothing visible, but people keep looking. The parrot seen watching the child's message in frost does not stay long. It tilts its head once, hops sideways along the window ledge, and then lifts into the cold morning air, wings catching sunlight like thought. The child watches until it disappears, then whispers something into the silence. No one hears it but the pane of glass. The act of writing messages becomes less about the birds now and more about memory. Some notes are meant for no one. Some are meant for someone long gone. A woman writes a message and burns it, not in mourning but as offering. A man copies an old letter onto the bark of a tree, not expecting anyone to read it, only that it might stay a little longer that way. The old message wall in the bakery becomes a community board of a different sort. Not announcements or schedules, but questions and wonders. What if we are already forgiven? Has anyone else been dreaming in feathers? Is it possible the sky knows too much? Someone begins leaving answers, sometimes beside the questions, sometimes above, sometimes on different parts of the wall entirely. Forgiveness arrived before the question. Yes, but it is not a bad thing. The sky forgets on purpose. The baker says he has no idea who leaves the replies. He says this with a smile, brushing flour from his hands. New perches are erected not for the birds, but for the notes. Painted beams placed along fences and paths, each with a simple hook or ledge where folded papers can be left. Some are taken, some fall off and are tucked into shoes or coat pockets. Some vanish overnight. A few return with new handwriting. One day, a message appears on a familiar post, written in the hand of someone who moved away long ago. It reads, "It took longer to leave than I thought it would." The town begins recording messages orally as well. A volunteer group meets once a month to read aloud from the archives. They sit in a circle, passing old notes hand to hand, speaking them into a small microphone that records to cassette. These tapes are stored in wooden boxes labeled Echo Shelf. Some residents listen to them before bed, some do not. Some say the voices sound like their own. An old woman teaches her parrot to repeat a phrase. "I am still thinking about it." The bird says it at unpredictable times, while perched, while flying, while stealing toast. Visitors begin repeating it too, like a refrain, a chant, a mantra for unclosed chapters. The school adds a new wall titled "Not Yet." Here, students leave messages they are not ready to send. Some are addressed to themselves. Some are addressed to the person who will understand this later. The wall grows, layer upon layer, paper beneath paper, sentences built into towers of future meanings. One note reads, "If I stop asking, will you stop waiting?" Another, "Come find me when you know how." A traveling writer visits and asks to interview the birds. The librarian, amused, offers to transcribe. The writer asks 3 questions. The birds answer by flying away, one by one, in different directions. The transcript consists of the writer's reactions. They did not hesitate. None of them looked back. That might be the answer. The entry is accepted into the archive. As the seasons change, some messages fade. They curl, they flake, they dissolve into mulch beneath trees. The townspeople do not attempt to preserve them all. The idea, they say, was never about permanence. It was about passing through, a hand held out, not grabbed, a pause, not a fix. A new section of the archive is built from wood, salvaged from a toppled barn. Each drawer is mismatched, each handle different. The top drawer contains messages left in shoes, the second those found in pages of borrowed books. The third notes recovered from laundry. The fourth is empty, with a label that says, "For what you remember without writing." The birds keep coming. Sometimes they perch in view, sometimes they watch from further off. One lands near the bench where the old man still writes daily, though slower now. The bird stays for 20 minutes, then leaves with half a torn sheet. The man nods and says aloud, "That part was for you." And when the town sleeps, soft and folded into itself, messages rest in windowsills and jacket linings and beneath mugs. Some remain. Some are taken by wind, a few float downstream, and one, always, is left exactly where someone needs to find it. A note that says nothing, but feels like something. At this point, no one really remembers how many messages have been sent. There are no official counts, no ledgers, no charts with upward trends, just the quiet accumulation of notes placed where they might be found, and the gentle, ongoing assumption that someone or something has been finding them. The shelf in the bakery now holds a small wooden sign, hand-lettered in neat script, ongoing. It replaced an older one that said archive, which had replaced an even older one that said incoming. No one remembers who carved the new one. Someone probably just thought it was time. Not all messages are paper now. Some are spoken and left in the wind. Some are traced on dusty glass and allowed to fade. One resident makes a habit of whispering short messages into jars, sealing them tight, and burying them under the lilac bushes behind the church. He calls it composting the past. Children still write their notes, often with more mystery than meaning. A recent batch included, "The puddle forgives you." I watched a spider think, "Please say something to the moon." The school's message wall now features 3 sections, written, drawn, and left in a dream. Submissions to the third are taken verbally, recited at morning circle, and transcribed by the teacher in silver pen. The teacher once explained, "Not all messages are meant to be remembered by the mind. Some are for the parts of us that are harder to name." The board remains full. In the town archive, the final drawer, the one once meant for conclusions, has been expanded. It now includes a folder labeled pauses, another labeled almosts, and a velvet-lined compartment marked simply, "Returned unopened, still enough." One message inside reads, "You never needed the reply, you just needed to know it was read." Maynard's old logbooks are now displayed in a small glass cabinet. Visitors can flip through copies, annotated by school children and indexed by feeling, longing, hope, humor, confusion. The children add their own glosses in the margins, beside a note that says, "Arrived late, but arrived." A student has written, "Like spring." No one knows when the parrot visit stopped entirely. There was no announcement, no last note, just fewer sightings, longer intervals, more time passing between moments of unexpected feathers. Still the town keeps writing. A traveling linguist once asked the librarian whether she believed the birds had understood the messages. The librarian replied, "That depends on what you mean by understood." She then opened a drawer filled entirely with messages that said things like, "You were right to look up." "I meant to say more." This helped. The linguist did not ask again. As the years turn, some messages become traditions. The bakery slips handwritten affirmations into loaves once a week. The school assigns messages as art projects. One family writes a single word every day on their fence, chalked at dawn, washed away by rain or time, words like brave, here. Still, every so often someone adds a word without being seen. Once, the message becomes, "Still listening." The town pauses when they see it. And so the story continues, not with feathers, not anymore, but with attention. With kindness held quietly between people. With the idea that messages do not always need carriers if people are willing to notice. A woman begins writing her own story, handwritten on long sheets of paper, each one rolled and tied and placed in a basket by the door. Her grandchildren are instructed to read them not in order, but in the order they are found. The first one says, "Begin anywhere," and eventually one message, a small one, easily missed, is found nestled in a drawer at the very back of the archive. It has been folded several times and worn smooth at the edges. There is no signature, no date, just 3 words in neat, faded ink. Keep sending them. The children who once wrote their first messages in blocky pencil strokes are grown now. Some have stayed. Some have left. Some return with new stories and old feathers tucked into journals. One writes letters to her past self, tucking them into library books she once loved. Another starts a small press, publishing collections of anonymous notes from around the region. The press's first book is titled Things Carried Quietly. It sells modestly, it is gifted often, it is never discounted. Back at the bakery, the original message shelf, now protected by a pane of glass, is joined by a second. This one is for replies. People write back to old messages, even if they do not know the sender. They answer, "You were missed. I understand now. I kept going." One reply says only, "Me too." Sometimes the replies are written years later. Sometimes by someone entirely different. Sometimes a message receives many replies, layered like bark on a tree. Each one part of a conversation across time, across strangers, across silence. A child asks one day, "Are the birds ever coming back?" The teacher pauses, then says, "I think they never really left, they just started listening from farther away." It is enough. The birds, when they are seen now, are not expected to carry anything. But when one circles above or pauses on a branch, people still glance at the old posts, just in case. On the archive's outer wall, someone paints a mural. It shows a bird, not flying, not perched, but resting. Above it floats a single word, "Received." No one signs the mural. The town decides to leave it that way. And now, with the valley quiet again, and the messages tucked safely into drawers, jars, and corners of thought, the world slows. There is no more need to check the windowsill, no need to chase the breeze. The night has arrived like a careful envelope, sealed softly around you. Outside, the moon slips its light over the rooftops, brushing against chimney stones and sleepy panes of glass. A bird, not one carrying anything, just one, drifts silently overhead. It circles once, then gone. In the house, a kettle whistles, a chair sighs beneath old wood, the bakery's oven glows low, the last loaf cooling beneath a tea towel. In the archive, someone lights a candle, not for reading, but simply to be warm beside. And somewhere, perhaps far away, perhaps not far at all, a note waits. It might not be written yet. It might be waiting for your hand, your breath, your story. The message is not urgent. It is only honest, only soft, only yours. Let your thoughts settle now. Let the sentences in your mind unwind, not to end, but to rest. Let your breathing ease like pages closing one by one into a book that is not finished, just paused. If the day left pieces of itself scattered, unanswered questions, unspoken words, a list still waiting, leave them gently for morning. They will still be there, or they will not. And either way, you will be ready. You do not need to understand it all right now. The meaning can wait. The message can wait. You are allowed, in this quiet moment, to simply be the listener. Not the writer, not the sender, just someone who is present, someone who receives. Some stories do not conclude. Some messages just become part of you. And maybe, even tonight, something has arrived. Quiet as feathers, gentle as sleep, and waiting to be read when morning finds you. Let yourself drift into that silence now, into the hush of a town that never needed to shout to be heard, into a story that asks nothing more of you than your rest. There is nothing left to carry, only calm, only peace, only this one breath, and the next after that. You have been found, you have been heard, you have already arrived.